I was driving to my daughter-in-law Rachel's house for our monthly family dinner when I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There, parked in her driveway next to her Honda, was Steven's silver BMW. My husband should have been at his insurance office until 7 p.m. What was he doing at Rachel's house an hour before dinner? Something cold settled in my stomach as I parked across the street. The living room window was open and I could hear voices inside. I was about to walk up and ring the doorbell when I caught sight of them through that window. Steven and Rachel in an embrace that definitely wasn't family appropriate. My hands started trembling as I crept closer to the porch. What I heard next would change everything. Once we get the power of attorney signed next Tuesday, Steven's voice drifted through the window. We can start draining her accounts. The old fool has no idea we've been planning this for months. I grabbed the porch railing to keep from collapsing. Rachel's laughter followed, same sweet laugh she used when I'd shower her children with gifts. "Poor Barbara," she said. And I could hear the fake sympathy dripping from every word. "She thinks she has a loving husband and devoted daughter-in-law. She has no idea we're about to steal everything and disappear together." My mind reeled. Steven and Rachel? Together? Planning to steal from me? I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands and hit record. Every business instinct I developed over decades told me I needed to document whatever betrayal I was about to uncover. 18 months of sneaking around, Steven continued, his voice filled with excitement. But it's been worth it. You're everything Barbara never was. 18 months. While I'd been supporting his lifestyle and treating Rachel like the daughter I never had, they'd been plotting my destruction. "Once we have access to her accounts," Rachel replied, "we can finally be together openly. Thomas will never know what hit him." My son Thomas. My own daughter-in-law was planning to destroy him too. I stood there in the shadows for what felt like hours, recording their conspiracy. They talked about power of attorney documents, about draining accounts, about disappearing together once they'd stolen everything I'd worked for. But what they said next, about what they really thought of me, about their detailed plans, about how they'd been manipulating my own family, that's when I realized these two had made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because the woman they thought was a helpless target had spent decades building something they couldn't even comprehend. And they were about to learn that stealing from Barbara Hayes was about to become the most expensive decision they'd ever make. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I completely destroyed two people who thought they could rob me blind, you need to know exactly who they were trying to steal from and why their plan was doomed from the moment they chose me as their victim. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to Never Too Old channel. We're creating a community of incredible women who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. Now, back to the story. My name is Barbara Hayes. I'm 68 years old, and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. What Steven and Rachel didn't know as they planned to steal from me was exactly who they were targeting. 15 years ago, when my first husband Robert died, I was 53 years old with a broken heart and a $50,000 life insurance check. Most widows my age might have put that money in savings and lived quietly on Social Security. Instead, I bought my first rental property, a rundown duplex that nobody else wanted. I'd never run a business before, but I'd been keeping our family books for 3 decades. I knew how to spot a good deal, how to negotiate with contractors, and how to make every dollar count. That first duplex taught me something powerful. I had a gift for real estate. Today, I own Hayes Properties, a business empire worth nearly $20 million, 47 properties across 3 counties, rental homes, commercial buildings, development land. I still negotiate every major deal myself, because building this empire taught me to spot a liar from across any conference table. But success never changed how I treated the people I loved. When my son Thomas married Rachel 8 years ago, I surprised them by paying off their mortgage as a wedding gift. Rachel cried and hugged me that day, calling me the most generous mother-in-law in the world. I was so happy to help them start their marriage debt-free. Over the years, I've covered Rachel's children's private school tuition, Emma and Jake from her previous marriage. Thomas has been a wonderful stepfather to those kids, and I wanted to give them every advantage. Quality education matters, and I was proud to invest in their futures. I met Steven 12 years ago at a charity fundraiser here in Charlotte. He was recently divorced, struggling to make ends meet as an insurance salesman, driving a beat-up Honda and living in a tiny apartment. But he pursued me with such genuine enthusiasm, telling everyone he'd never met such an accomplished, intelligent woman. I was 58 then, lonely after 5 years of widowhood. Steven seemed so grateful for the stability I could provide, so appreciative of everything I'd built. When we married 10 years ago, I thought I'd found real love again. Our marriage transformed Steven's life overnight. He went from barely making rent to living in luxury, driving a new BMW, joining the country club, never worrying about money again. I didn't mind. I had more wealth than I could spend in a lifetime, and seeing him happy made me happy. Steven knew about my business success, of course. He'd seen the property deeds, knew about the rental income, understood I was financially comfortable. But like most people, he only saw the surface of what I'd built. The office building where Hayes Properties operates. The dozen rental units everyone knew about, the obvious signs of success. What he didn't know, what nobody knew except my accountant and attorney, was the true scope of my empire. The offshore accounts I'd established for tax purposes. The properties I owned through different business entities. The development land I'd been quietly accumulating for a major project. For years, Steven appreciated my generosity and business acumen. But about 6 months ago, something shifted. Instead of admiring my deals, he started questioning them. "Barbara, don't you think that contractor is charging too much? Are you sure that property manager is being honest?" At first, I thought he was being protective. A caring husband looking out for his wife's interests. But gradually, his questions became suggestions about how I should handle my business differently. Rachel started expressing similar concerns. "Mom," she'd say, "My me." She always called me Mom. "Wealthy women like you can be targets. Maybe Steven should have more involvement in screening your business dealings." They began having conversations about my finances without including me. When I'd walk into a room, they'd stop talking and change the subject. I started wondering if I was becoming too trusting, if my judgment was slipping with age. Steven started telling people I was too generous for my own good, and that he needed to watch out for me. He'd intercept calls from contractors and property managers, claiming he was protecting me from potential fraud. The woman who'd built a multi-million-dollar empire from nothing started second-guessing her own business instincts, because the people closest to her were systematically undermining her confidence. What I discovered on Rachel's porch that night wasn't just a betrayal, it was the revelation that 2 people I'd trusted completely had been orchestrating a campaign to make me doubt myself so they could steal everything I'd worked for. But they'd made one critical mistake. They thought they were manipulating a vulnerable older woman who'd gotten lucky in business. They had no idea they were targeting someone who'd spent decades outmaneuvering people who underestimated her intelligence. And that mistake was about to cost them everything. Steven's protective facade became more calculated with each passing week. He started intercepting calls from my contractors and property managers, telling them he was screening potential fraud on behalf of my wife. When I confronted him about it, he'd put on this concerned expression and say, "Barbara, you're too trusting. These people see a successful older woman and think easy target." He began making worried comments to our neighbors here in Charlotte. "You know how generous Barbara is," he'd tell them over the fence. "I just worry about people who might take advantage of her good nature." I started noticing how people looked at me differently after these conversations, with pity instead of the respect I'd earned building my business. Important papers began disappearing from my home office, only to turn up in Steven's desk drawer. When I asked why he'd moved them, he'd say, "I was just securing them, honey. Identity theft is a real problem for people with assets like yours." He made it sound like protection, but it felt like he was taking control of my life piece by piece. Meanwhile, Rachel launched her own campaign with surgical precision. She started working on Thomas, planting seeds of doubt about my business judgment. "Your mother is incredibly successful," she'd tell him, "but wealthy older women are common targets for financial predators. Maybe we should suggest she have more family oversight of major decisions." The questions Rachel asked me became increasingly detailed and specific. "Mom, How do you keep track of all these properties? Do you have someone helping you with the legal paperwork? I thought she was genuinely interested in learning about real estate investing. I had no idea she was cataloging every asset she could identify. She'd casually drop suggestions about estate planning during our family dinners. Mom, what would happen to your business if something happened to you? Maybe Steven should have power of attorney so he can protect your assets if you ever need help. The way she said it made it sound like loving concern for my future security. What I didn't realize was how effectively they were isolating me from my own professional network. My property managers started getting calls from Steven asking about protecting Barbara from potential fraud. They'd call me confused, asking if I was having problems or if someone was taking advantage of me. My longtime contractor, Bill Martinez, pulled me aside after one of these incidents. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "your husband called asking if I was being honest in my billing. In 15 years of working together, have I ever given you reason to doubt my integrity?" I was mortified. Steven was systematically undermining relationships I'd built over decades. Friends in my business circle began expressing concern. "Steven seems so worried about you," they'd say. "He thinks you might be too trusting with your money." The woman who'd negotiated million-dollar deals without blinking started second-guessing every business decision because the people closest to her were constantly questioning her judgment. Family gatherings became meetings about my finances that happened without me. I'd find Steven, Rachel, and Thomas huddled in the kitchen discussing Mom's situation and what's best for her. When I'd try to join the conversation, they'd quickly change subjects. "Oh, we were just talking about the weather," Rachel would say, with that sweet smile. The warning signs I missed were growing more obvious by the week. Steven's casino trips became a regular routine. Twice-weekly visits that he claimed were just stress relief. When I asked about the frequency, he'd brush it off. "It's just a few hundred here and there, honey. Everyone needs a hobby." Credit card statements showed charges I couldn't identify. 3,000 to 5,000 monthly for things that made no sense. When I questioned Steven about them, he'd wave me off. "Just business expenses and household stuff, Barbara. Don't worry your pretty head about it." That phrase should have been a red flag. But I was so worn down by months of having my judgment questioned. Rachel's interest in my asset structures became almost academic in its thoroughness. "How do you decide which properties to put in different business entities? Do you have accounts in different banks for security purposes?" She presented these questions as a daughter-in-law wanting to learn from a successful businesswoman. Thomas started echoing their concerns, which hurt the most. "Mom, maybe you should have someone help you double-check major financial decisions. Rachel says successful older women often get targeted by scammers." My own son was suggesting I couldn't handle the business I'd built from nothing. The most insidious part was how they made me complicit in doubting myself. Steven would review contracts I'd negotiated and point out clauses that seemed questionable. Rachel would express worry about property managers who'd worked with me for years. They created an atmosphere where every decision I made was scrutinized and second-guessed. I began keeping my business dealings more private, not because I was hiding anything, but because I was tired of having every choice questioned by people who'd never built anything themselves. The confident woman who transformed a $50,000 insurance payout into a multi-million-dollar empire was starting to wonder if maybe she was losing her edge. What I didn't understand was that every expression of concern, every offer to help, every suggestion about protection was part of a carefully orchestrated plan. They were systematically breaking down my confidence, so I'd willingly hand over legal control of everything I'd worked decades to build. But they made one crucial miscalculation in their manipulation campaign. They assumed I was just a lucky widow who'd stumbled into success. They had no idea they were undermining a woman who'd spent 40 years learning to recognize when someone was trying to take advantage of her. And that expertise was about to serve me in ways they never could have imagined. Back home in my kitchen, I played the recording through my laptop speakers. What I heard in the 47 minutes of audio made me realize their betrayal went deeper than I'd imagined. "Thomas has been our biggest asset." Rachel's voice came through clearly. "When I suggested the power of attorney idea 3 weeks ago, he thought it was his own brilliant solution. He's been pushing Barbara harder than we ever could." My heart sank. Thomas hadn't just been manipulated, He'd been actively working against me, believing he was helping. The timing couldn't be more perfect. Stephen continued. I checked her calendar. She has that property inspection in Raleigh next Wednesday. Once I have the documents signed Tuesday, I can start transfers Wednesday morning while she's 2 hours away. By the time she gets back, the first million will already be moved. They'd been studying my schedule, planning around my business trips. Every detail of my life had been weaponized against me. What about her attorney? Rachel asked. James Crawford handles all her legal work. Already handled, Stephen replied with smugness in his voice. I've been intercepting his mail for 6 weeks. She thinks he's been slow responding to her calls, but I've been screening everything. He has no idea about the power of attorney meeting. 6 weeks. Stephen had been cutting me off from my legal counsel for over a month, creating a bubble of isolation around me. The gambling debt is worse than I told you, Stephen admitted. It's not just the casino. I owe private lenders too. Total is closer to 180,000. Not the 100 I mentioned before. So he'd been lying even to his co-conspirator. The desperation in his voice revealed how deep in debt he really was. Jesus, Stephen, Rachel snapped. That changes the timeline. We need to move faster. Relax. Once we have access to her accounts, 180 is nothing. Hell, she probably spends that much on property taxes. They talked about my money like loose change. Decades of careful saving and investment reduced to casual pocket money in their minds. I've been working on the kids too, Rachel said, her voice turning calculating. Emma asked me last week why Thomas never has money for the things other dads buy. I told her it's because we're supporting Grandma Barbara's expensive lifestyle. She was poisoning her own children against me, turning Emma and Jake into allies for when she destroyed their family. Smart, Stephen approved. What about after we're gone? Think Thomas will figure it out? Eventually, but by then we'll have new identities in the Caymans. I've already researched the paperwork. Barbara's money will buy us completely clean. Starts, new names, new backgrounds, new lives, new identities. This wasn't just theft, it was complete disappearance. They planned to erase themselves and start over with my life's work. The best part, Rachel continued, is watching her second-guess herself. Last week she actually apologized to me for being difficult about the financial planning suggestions. She's breaking herself down for us. God. She's pathetic. Stephen laughed. 68 years old and still desperate for approval like a teenager. Makes this almost too easy. But then came the revelation that made my blood turn to ice. What if she doesn't make it to 70? Rachel asked casually. I mean, accidents happen. Older women fall down stairs, have heart attacks, get confused with medications. Don't even think about it, Stephen said quickly. Murder investigations are complicated. Financial fraud is clean. No bodies, no forensics, just missing money and grieving family members. I'm not talking murder, Rachel replied smoothly. I'm talking about helping nature along. High blood pressure medication mixed with the wrong supplements. Sleep aids that interact with her heart condition. Things that look completely natural. My hands started shaking. They weren't just planning to steal from me. Rachel was researching ways to kill me if the theft got complicated. You're getting ahead of yourself, Stephen said, but he didn't sound entirely opposed. Let's see how Tuesday goes first. Fine. But keep it in mind as backup. Dead women don't report financial crimes. I sat in my kitchen, staring at that laptop screen, realizing I wasn't just dealing with thieves. Rachel had crossed into something much darker. She was prepared to murder me if their original plan hit obstacles. The recording revealed financial crime timelines, manipulation strategies, and isolation tactics. But buried in those 47 minutes was also evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. They thought they were stealing from a lonely widow. They had no idea they'd just confessed to planned homicide on a device that would send them both to prison for life. I spent the next hour transcribing every word of that recording. Not just the theft confession. Every detail about medication tampering, identity changes, and murder contingencies. When I finished, I had documentation of crimes that went far beyond financial fraud. At 11 p.m., I called my attorney James Crawford's emergency line. James, Stephen has been intercepting your mail and calls for 6 weeks. We need to meet tomorrow before he realizes you've heard from me directly. Barbara, what are you talking about? I have evidence of elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. I need you to listen to something. I played 30 seconds of the recording. Just enough for James to understand the scope. The silence on his end lasted 20 seconds. My office, 7 a.m. Don't tell anyone about this call. Next, I contacted Maria Santos, my accountant. Maria, I need a complete audit of every account Stephen has accessed in the past 6 months. Also, research how medications can be weaponized to look like natural causes. Barbara, are you in immediate physical danger? Potentially. That's why we need to move fast. My third call was to Detective Patricia Wells. Detective, I have recorded evidence of planned elder financial abuse and conspiracy to commit murder. How quickly can we set up prosecution? Murder conspiracy changes everything. Can you get to a safe location tonight? I'm staying here. Running would alert them. But I need this resolved before Tuesday. By midnight, I had emergency meetings scheduled with my entire legal team, but I also made one more call to my son Thomas. Mom, it's late. Is everything okay? Thomas, I need you to come over right now. Don't tell Rachel. There's something you need to hear before Tuesday's meeting. What meeting Tuesday? So they hadn't even told him about the power of attorney signing. He truly had no idea what role he was playing in their conspiracy. When Thomas arrived 20 minutes later, I sat him down at my kitchen table. I'm going to play you a recording. It's going to be painful to hear, but you need to know what Rachel and Stephen have been planning. I played the section where Rachel discussed manipulating him and planning to divorce him after stealing my money. Thomas's face went through shock, confusion, denial, and finally devastating comprehension. She's been lying to me about everything, he whispered. The financial planning suggestions, the concerns about your business judgment, the power of attorney idea, all of it was to rob you. There's more, I said gently, and played the section about poisoning his children against me and her willingness to consider killing me if theft became complicated. Thomas put his head in his hands. My kids. She's been turning Emma and Jake against you to make it easier to destroy our family. Thomas, I need your help, not to get revenge, but to stop them before they hurt more people. What do you need me to do? Act normally until Tuesday. Don't let Rachel know you've heard this. Can you do that? Yes. But Mom, what about the kids? If Rachel gets arrested, we'll protect Emma and Jake. That's priority 1. By dawn Tuesday, I had a complete legal strategy in place, not just to stop the theft, but to protect my grandchildren from the destruction Rachel was about to bring down on their family. James had prepared power of attorney documents that would trigger immediate law enforcement alerts. Maria had traced every stolen penny and prepared evidence files for prosecution. Detective Wells had coordinated with family services to ensure Emma and Jake would be cared for when their mother was arrested. But most importantly, Thomas was now working with me instead of against me. Rachel's biggest manipulation tool had become her greatest weakness. Stephen thought he was signing documents that would make him rich. Rachel believed she was hours away from her new wealthy life. Neither of them knew that the vulnerable widow they'd targeted had spent the last 4 days building a prosecution case that would destroy them both completely. The trap was set. All they had to do was walk into it. Tuesday morning, Stephen was unusually cheerful at breakfast. Today's the day we really protect your assets, sweetheart, he said, completely unaware that Thomas had spent the weekend secretly moving his children to his sister's house. Emma and Jake are having a sleepover at Aunt Susan's this week, Thomas had texted me Monday night. They don't need to see what's coming. At James Crawford's office, Stephen signed the power of attorney documents with genuine enthusiasm. This gives me real authority to keep Barbara safe, he told James proudly. James just nodded and filed the papers that would trigger alerts the moment Stephen attempted any transfers. Wednesday morning, Stephen left for the bank whistling. I watched him drive away, knowing Detective Wells was already positioned there with arrest warrants. Thomas was at school teaching his regular classes, maintaining the perfect normal routine we'd planned. The call came at 10:52 a.m. "Mrs. Hayes, your husband is in custody. We're bringing Rachel in now." By noon, both arrests were complete. But what neither Stephen nor Rachel expected was the additional charges waiting for them. "We're adding conspiracy to commit murder to your existing charges," Detective Wells informed Rachel during her interrogation. "Your recorded discussion about medication tampering and helping nature along constitutes premeditated conspiracy." Rachel's face went ashen. "That was just talk. I never would have actually." "Researching how to kill someone while planning to steal from them is conspiracy to commit murder under North Carolina law. That's life without parole." Stephen's interrogation revealed the full scope of his desperation. "The private lenders don't wait for casino payback schedules," he confessed. "They were threatening to break my legs. I needed Barbara's money to stay alive." But when Detective Wells played the section of the recording where he didn't reject Rachel's murder suggestion, Stephen realized his legal situation had escalated beyond financial crimes. "You didn't report your co-conspirator's plan to kill your wife," Detective Wells explained. "Under state law, that makes you an accessory to conspiracy to commit murder." The murder conspiracy charges changed everything. Stephen received 15 years instead of 8. Rachel got 25 to life with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Thomas handled Emma and Jake's transition with remarkable strength. "Mommy made some very bad choices," he explained to his children. "She hurt people we love, and now she has to face consequences. But you'll always be safe with me." Within 6 months, Thomas had full custody and had begun rebuilding his life. Rachel's parental rights were terminated after she tried to contact the children from prison, attempting to turn them against Thomas and me. The financial investigation revealed Stephen had stolen exactly $180,000 over 18 months. Every penny was recovered from the casino accounts where he'd lost it. The casino was forced to return the stolen money under fraud recovery laws. My business grew rapidly once the theft attempts stopped. Without Stephen draining accounts for gambling debts, Hayes Properties expanded into commercial development. The property in Raleigh that Stephen had planned around became a major retail complex worth $12 million. More importantly, Emma and Jake became regular visitors to my house again. Thomas had been honest with them about what their mother had planned, and both children expressed relief that the plan had been stopped. "Grandma Barbara," Jake said during one visit, "Mommy was going to make you sick on purpose." "That's really mean." "Yes, sweetheart. But she can't hurt anyone anymore. And now you know that families protect each other. They don't hurt each other for money." Thomas eventually started dating again. A fellow teacher named Linda, who embraced Emma and Jake completely. When they married 2 years later, the children had the stable family they deserved. At the wedding, Emma asked me, "Grandma Barbara, do you think Mommy will ever say sorry for what she did?" "I don't know, sweetheart. But what matters is that you understand the difference between people who love you and people who use you. Your daddy and Linda love you. I love you. That's what real family looks like." Rachel never did apologize. Her letters from prison alternated between blaming me for destroying her life and begging for money for commissary purchases. I donated her letters, unopened, to a domestic violence organization that uses them to teach about financial abuse patterns. Stephen died in prison 4 years into his sentence. A heart attack brought on by the stress of constantly looking over his shoulder for the illegal bookmakers he'd stiffed. I felt nothing when Thomas told me the news. Today, at 71, I run a national organization that's helped recover over $40 million in stolen assets for elder abuse victims. Emma is 17 and plans to study law. Jake is 15 and wants to be a teacher like his father. They thought they were targeting a lonely widow. Instead, they discovered what happens when you threaten someone who has the intelligence to outmaneuver you, the resources to destroy you, and the courage to protect others from the same fate. They thought my age made me fragile. Instead, it made me formidable. And the best part? I'm just getting started. So, that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you believe Stephen and Rachel got what they deserved? Or should I have handled their betrayal differently? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine.